Order of the day.
Adjourn debate on the Prime Minister's statement and the amendment proposed to it.
Dr Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I've been looking forward for some time to taking a call on the Prime Minister's statement because I've got quite a lot to say. Mr Speaker, people in the southwest suburbs of Christchurch, where I live and where my electorate of Wigram is located, have long memories of a local MP called Norman Kirk, who served the Sydenham electorate faithfully for the years 1969 to 1974. And he is a leader who is warmly remembered because he had a pretty simple message for the people of the Sydenham electorate and the people of this country as their Prime Minister. And that was they needed some security in their lives, they needed somewhere to live, and they needed a job. Mr Speaker, this is of course what we call the Kiwi dream. That's right, this is the dream that this government has given up on. These pretty simple aspirations that our great Prime Ministers like Kirk could articulate and stand up for the people of this country in relation to. But this is a government that has lost its way. It is arrogant, it is out of touch, and it is ignoring these big issues that are facing New Zealanders. We just need to look to issues such as the housing crisis. We need to look to issues such as the health cuts that we had questions this very day in the House about. We need to look at jobs. We need to look at wages. We need to look at the Christchurch recovery and what is happening in that very city where Norman Kirk made his life. Because this is a government of broken promises. This is a government that has given up on ordinary New Zealanders. And when we listen to the Prime Minister's statement that we heard in this House, it was a statement that was full of platitudes. It was a statement that was full of claims that everything was okay. Nothing to see here, move along, it's all okay. But Mr Speaker, as a child of the 1970s, I can very much see that that Kiwi dream is slipping away. What I remember from those long, warm summers of the 1970s as a child, where people did actually believe that they had a future. And if we take that forward into what that means in the 21st century, we have a generation of New Zealanders who are not growing up with that hope. What we have under National instead is an economy that is stacked in favour of a very few privileged, while everyday Kiwis find it harder to get ahead. We have a housing market that has become a plaything for speculators, locking a generation out of the dream of home ownership. We have a healthcare system where people are having to think about mortgaging their houses to pay for drugs. So we have a system where if you've got money you can access healthcare, and if you don't, you can't. We have an education system that is drowning our young people in debt, and we have rates of child poverty that no member in this House should be content to tolerate. This simply is not the New Zealand that any of us think about when we think about what it means to be a New Zealander and what we are capable of in this country. But this year began, Mr Speaker, with Andrew Little showing to the country a way back to this Kiwi dream. For Andrew Little to set out a vision for the future, something this government cannot do, but it has given up on any kind of vision or future, and it is plodding along. And the Working Futures plan that Labor and Andrew Little outlined at the beginning of this year showed a very clear path to the kind of New Zealand we could have, the alternative that could exist, where we back an economy where everybody can have access to education. Now, we've heard the absolute spinning around around of the government trying to counter this. First of all, they sent out the Spin Master General, Stephen Joyce, who came out with first and saying that it wouldn't do anything. Apparently, the Minister of Tertiary Education doesn't think greater access to tertiary education will actually do anything. So we thought that was a pretty interesting response. I think the Minister of Tertiary Education quickly realised that perhaps this wasn't the best thing for him to be saying, so change the spin. We've got a problem, we've got to change the spin. So then it was going to cost too much. This education, the way that Labor had a future for people where they could access education for up to 3 years to every New Zealander was simply going to cost too much, said Stephen Joyce. But then wait a minute, he remembered they'd started foreshadowing tax cuts and this money was going to be spent somewhere else anywhere. So he had to change the tack on that one. So went back. So what we have is a very clear difference, Mr Speaker. We have on the one hand the Labor Party that is setting out a vision for our future, for our young people, that backs them and says, when you leave school, we want to make sure you have the right skills and training, whether that be a university degree, whether that be an apprenticeship, or that be some kind of a polytech qualification that will get you into a job. And what's more, we don't want to set you up and saddle you with debt for the rest of your life in terms of getting there. Because, Mr Speaker, there's a lot of members in this House that go on about how debt doesn't matter. Well, this week we're going to see how much that debt does matter and what the level of student indebtedness in this country has risen to. And as someone who did pay for her education, because as well as being a child of the 70s, I was a teenager and young adult of the 90s where I had to pay for my university education and where I borrowed for that education. And I actually finished paying off my student loan last month. It was a very momentous day, it was great. That I went through the student loan scheme at the very worst ravages that it could be and the very worst circumstances you could have. And I actually don't want anyone else to be saddled with the kind of debt that I was saddled with after my education. I was saddled with a debt in excess of $100,000 for the PhD that I did at the University of Canterbury. This is the kind of debt that I do not want to stand by as someone who can make decisions in this country and not change it. And I think we all have a duty to make sure that we are making the future better for young people. And I am proud of the policy that Labor has announced at the beginning of this year. It's not just in education that this government is failing us, it's in health. And no greater demonstration are we seeing that with the cuts to health funding. The government, again, the spin machine comes out and they tell us that they've increased health funding every year. Well, let's cut the games, because we all know this is about real costs and how much the real costs are increasing by. But I want to talk specifically about mental health funding in Canterbury. That we have a government that said they were going to stand with the people of Canterbury. No one would be worse off. They would walk every step with them. That was five and a bit years ago. Well, Mr Speaker, this government has done anything but walk hand in hand with the people of Canterbury when it comes to their mental health funding. Instead, we have seen over $5 million cut from mental health services to a region that has greater need in mental health services than anywhere else. We are seeing an increase in ED admissions for suicide attempts. The police are reporting increased call-out for suicide attempts. We have children starting in our schools who have severe development problems because of the last 5 years that they have lived with. But the prescriptions for antidepressants and for anti-anxiety medications at Canterbury top anywhere else in the country. This is a region that is under pressure in mental health services, and this is a government that is cutting funding to our region for those issues. But it's not just in the issues of mental health services. If you read the written version of the Prime Minister's statement, there was a couple of paragraphs that made it in there about the Canterbury recovery. If you listened in the House, once you got past the sports jokes and the political put-downs, that Canterbury didn't make the director's cut of John Key's speech on the day. Simply, Canterbury is slipping down this government's priorities. Instead, they are taking money out to manufacture their surplus in terms of EQC funding. We have Sarah that has presided over botch-up after botch-up, but is instead of delivering the kind of recovery and the pace and the optimism that the people of Canterbury need, that we have an organisation that has been nothing more than a roadblock. But then you spend $2.6 million on spin trying to tell everyone it's okay, but only 74%. But 74% of Cantabrians don't have any confidence in the recovery decisions being made. That's not really on track. But Mr. Speaker, there is an alternative. We on this side of the House
I'm sorry
have not
to interrupt
given
the
up
member,
on the
but her
aspirations
time has
of the
expired.
Kiwi dream.